Hey there, let's talk about autofocus today, and specifically about the C70 and the R5. Those are my two cameras. When I switched from Sony back to Canon, I expected to shoot everything on the C70 and use the R5 kind of as a B cam and for photography. But what I realized pretty quickly is that the autofocus in the C70 is not as good as it is in the R5 or the Sony mirrorless cameras. And I'm not sure why that's the case. I don't know why they don't put the same autofocus system in all of their cameras. They're so good in the mirrorless cameras. But anyways, that's the reality. And I think that's been one criticism that I've seen online about the C70 is the autofocus. And so what I want to do today, and partly just for my own sake, and some of the other videos I've been doing lately is kind of just because, for my own sake, and I'll show you my use case, but to see how much it differs between the two. So for this test, what I'm going to be using is the C70 with the RF 15 to 35 2.8. And for the R5, I'll be using the RF 24 to 70 2.8. Now to keep it fair, because the C70 is a Super 35 sensor, I'll shoot that one at 24 millimeters and the R5 I'll set at 35 millimeters, so it gets pretty close. I'll leave the C70 at 2.8 because that'll emphasize as much autofocus misses as possible, having a more shallow depth of field. And I'll put it the R5 at f4, so it's somewhat comparable. And I'll just have an ND filter on this. But what I'm going to do is I'll take you guys outside and show a couple different examples. Mainly, I'm using this test to be filming myself because that's what I need the autofocus for. Mostly when I'm behind the camera and I'm filming other people, I can monitor the autofocus and see if it's working or not. But one thing is that when I'm filming myself and I'm, vlogging or doing things on my farm or whatever is going on, I want to make sure the autofocus is locked in and it's not something that I need to worry about, because if I have a take and I go back and look at my computer and the autofocus isn't dialed in, well, that's going to be a problem because I don't always get to retake those things. So let's head outside and we'll take a look. All right, so we're outside. We got the C70 next to the R5, and as I said, we're recording this at roughly a 35 millimeter full frame equivalent, just to get the two cameras to kind of look similar. I don't generally film myself at 35 millimeters, but I wanted to keep the lenses just not at one end of or the other, and I think these two RF lenses are pretty comparable in terms of performance and quality and all that kind of stuff. So 24 millimeters on the 15 to 35 and 35 millimeters on the 24 to 70. And for autofocus settings right now, I have the C70 set on face priority. There's also a face only mode, which I can talk a little bit later, but the face priority mode tends to be a little bit more reliable than the face only mode. The face only mode is really cool for really controlled situations like interviews with controlled lighting and stuff like that. It gives a much more natural thing. So when the subject either goes out of focus or leaves frame or something, it doesn't just jump to the background like it does on every other camera. And on the R5, I have human detection and eye focus and the whole thing, like the best eye detection and autofocus that I can for people. So anyways, we got this going here. Let me move around a little bit. Generally, what I found the C70 struggle a little bit with is if there's any sort of low light or underexposure. If things are well exposed, it does really, really well, but that isn't always the case, especially if you're doing run and gun style, making documentaries and things like that. If you're in controlled environment where you control the lights, it does work a lot better, or in really bright situations. We got the sun coming right over the camera here. I'm very bright and I should be pretty well in focus as I move around. Sometimes out to the edge of the frame maybe. How fast does it grab focus? I'm expecting the C70 have done pretty well in the situation. How fast does it grab focus? I'm expecting the C70 have done pretty well in the situation. Here we are with a backlit situation. Sun's coming right from behind me. A really nice way to shoot stuff and make things look really nice is putting the sun behind your subject. So I have a feeling the C70 will struggle a little bit more here just because my face will be darker. So let's see how it does. And I can check it back a little bit further. And I can check it back a little bit further. Now for this sort of underexposed test here, and this is a situation where I have to keep the subject a little bit dark because the background is very bright. Not an ideal situation for a shot. So I'm a little bit underexposed here so that I'm protecting the highlights and the bright information behind me. So now I think it might be a little bit different, but we'll see. Sometimes I notice that the box won't stay on my face on the C70. So now, I think it might be a little bit different, but we'll see. Sometimes I notice that the box won't stay on my face on the C70. One last autofocus test. I waited a little bit later into the day here, into the early evening. It's getting a little bit darker, but there's no extreme lighting, so it's not super bright on me. No backlight, no underexposed, kind of more evenly lit, but it is getting a little bit darker. And so what I want to show here is that probably the autofocus is going to be working the best in a very evenly lit situation. And you'll probably see that the box is holding on my face on the C70, and I probably also have eye focus on the R5. Now the lighting is a little bit more even. I'm noticing that the eye autofocus on the R5 is working a lot better. I noticed that in the earlier tests where the lighting was much more extreme, either really bright on me, backlit, underexposed, that kind of thing, I was not seeing the eye autofocus working as well. It was picking up my face most of the time, but especially if I was a little bit further away from the camera, it wasn't working. So I think that was one thing I was surprised about, but in more even lighting, I see the eye autofocus working really well. Just a little bit of a demonstration here on the face-only autofocus mode on the C70. It's also found on the C200. It's a great feature, and I actually wish this was included in the mirrorless cameras like the R5 and the R6. As I said, it's really cool for controlled situations, and I often use it in my office because I'm just sitting in front of the camera, and it does a really good job about it. It's nice when the subject either goes to the edge of the frame or leaves the frame. It won't jump to the background like you always see in autofocus systems. It'll jump back and forth. This will kind of hold that focus plane until the subject comes back in. It's denoted by the little O on the face icon on the screen there, and let me show you how it works. I also do like how on the screen it'll show you when the autofocus is not latched on. The box won't show up on the person's face, but also the little AF icon will be darkened out. So yeah, this is face only setting on the C70. After looking at all those tests, I think that was a good variety of situations. I don't think it covered every possible situation, but I think you get a good sense. And my big takeaway is that the R5 definitely has better autofocus overall. I think even in those more extreme situations, I think the C70 failed a few times. And I think also what was surprising to me was that the eye autofocus was not as reliable as I thought it was. You know, often when I hit record and I'm filming myself, I'm not looking at the screen, I'm looking at the lens or whatever I'm doing. And so I don't get to see that. But in those more extreme examples, I saw the eye autofocus was not grabbing my eye. But when that was happening, often the C70 was not able to grab my face as well. So of course, with better even lighting, autofocus will work better. Obviously, the image looks better too. So those are the big takeaways. There are some situations I think that really did struggle, and that was the sort of underexposure areas. And that's what I've heard online. So it was good for me to go through that exercise to see that. In my experience too, I've also, when I was shooting this gentleman here, he was wearing a big hat and it was covering it was shading his face, and you could see the autofocus kind of going in and out, and his face was staying pretty soft through the shot. So that was one of the first telltale signs I saw of the autofocus really struggling. That was one of the first days I used this camera out in the real world. And the other thing I've heard from people online is that people with darker skin tones, it really struggles. So that's another thing to consider too. You know, I don't have someone around here to film right now, but you know, for filming myself, you know, these are the results that I got. Of course, your mileage may vary depending on your lighting and the subjects that you'll be filming. So I think I'm gonna stick with the R5 for filming myself for the time being, but I think there's some more experimentation to be done on the C70 in terms of different focus modes. The other thing I forgot to mention earlier in the video is that I didn't change any of the autofocus settings in the cameras, like the speed or sensitivity and those kinds of things. So those were just the way it came in the camera. I'm sure there's some more stuff you can just tweak in there. But in general, I think the C70 autofocus is pretty good. Is it the same as the R5? No. But I think it's something that you need to know its limitations, learn how to work with it. But as I said, for the time being, when I'm out filming myself and I can't be checking the screen all the time, I'd probably be filming myself on the R5. Anyways, hope this was helpful. I haven't seen too many of these kinds of videos out there, so I wanted to put this out there. As I said, I'll be using these cameras a lot more, and we'll keep you guys posted if things change. Hope you enjoyed this, and if you enjoyed this kind of style of video and content on these cameras, there's a lot more to come. So please hit subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.